Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today my name's Robert George, Director of Employer Info Systems, and today we're going to go over creditable service for employers. We have a few topics that hopefully we won't run over. I know we ran over previous week, but I think we're looking pretty good for this week. So first and foremost, in the chat, I believe we have provided a link to the PDFs. Scott, can you drop that in there? I'm not sure I did that, actually. I apologize.
I will drop that in there in just a moment. Yep.
Thank you. So, sorry for the delay, everybody. There will be a PDF of today's presentation in the chat. You can download it if you'd like on paper if you want to take notes. So we'll just give a moment for that to happen. Sorry for not doing that before we started. But while we're taking care of that, on behalf of the board and our executive director, thank you for joining us today. We're going to cover. I'll go over the agenda while we're waiting to do that. So first, we're going to talk about some of the training sessions we're hosting. So this is one of them. We'll talk about our progress in that process. We're going to talk about how the benefit calculation works and the key components, just to give you a better idea of exactly what your deduction reports do. The mechanisms we use called service correction codes, as well as the employee roster and employment events, which is going to include going over some leave of absences and workers' compensation cases, or at least the details for them. And then other ways employees can be credited service. And then we'll wrap everything up with showing you what it looks like when your employees download their creditable service from ITRS. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's get started. So first, as you can see, we're doing a whole set of training sessions this summer. So we've already gone through 3 of them. Those are available to download. Technically, it's like 2 of them because if you're in a charter school or not in a charter school, you'd want a different version of the membership eligibility onboarding training. And we have the introduction to ITRS. There's a lot of good stuff in there that you might not think of as introductory, things like grant payments, military. So please check those out if you haven't had the opportunity. And we're writing all of these training sessions with the idea of being progressive, so they're all related, and you kind of we're working our way through all the different topics for an employer. So today's session is going to be on creditable service, employment events, leave of absence, and workers' comp. Now, I know we talked about this a little bit in the main in the intro to MTRS training session. I'm going to cover this a little bit, and I'm going to add a little bit to what we talked about in the first training session. So first, MTRS is a free benefit to public employers. We're funded by member contributions or employee contributions, as well as funding from the Commonwealth. There's no employer match on standard member contributions. So this is a free thing that employers get from the Commonwealth. Public employers, frankly, it's a really good tool for recruitment. It can be a great tool for retention, and it might be something you'd want to sell a little more when you're trying to recruit folks in. Employees earn service credit for public employment. We're going to talk about exactly how that gets credited today. Service as a teacher is accumulated from all teaching in the same benefit, and non-teaching service can be transferred to the MTRS if somebody has prior public service that it wasn't teacher service. So if they were a police officer and they hadn't retired, or if they worked in the town library and now they're a school librarian, they'd be able to move that over. Now, members can also enhance their benefit through a limited number of service purchases. So we'll talk about those in a little bit too. Now, benefits are based on a calculation of age, service, and salary. So we highlighted service here because that's what we're talking about for today. It's the service component. Now, folks' retirement benefits are guaranteed for life. Okay, so there are 2 tiers in the benefit program. Tier 1, which was all the members from 1914 through 2012, and then Tier 2 was introduced in 2012. It's part of pension reform. Members can opt for multiple types of benefit at retirement, including one referred to as an option C, where they can leave a benefit for their first family member, generally a spouse. And not only will they be covered their whole life, or not only will you be covered for your whole life as a retiree, but if you were to pass away before your spouse would then be covered. And they are allowed to have a benefit for the rest of their life. So it's a really cool benefit from that perspective, and it really helps take care of your family. Now, if members do not qualify for benefit, or for some reason they think they're going to do better by taking their funds out when they leave service, they can always take a member account refund, Typically, this will be somebody with maybe only a couple of years of service. Maybe they're moving to another state or just deciding that public school teaching isn't for them. Um, Folks who are looking to take a refund, though, they can't be contributing to another contributory retirement board. So for instance, if they were a teacher and now they're taking a job at DESE, they can't refund their MTRS account because it is going to roll over to DESE. That's where I was mentioning that the non-teacher service can transfer to MTRS. MTRS service can also transfer to a non-teaching. And then last but not least, we also offer both accidental and ordinary disability benefits. So for instance, if somebody was in their career and they're suffering some sort of debilitating disease, or if they were, say, injured at work, in addition to the normal standard retirement benefits, we do offer a disability benefit as well. Now, what we're going to do a little different than what we talked about in the first program, I just want to kind of show you a calculation. This is a very basic calculation. It's for a tier 1 member, okay? So the member is 60 years old. Therefore, their age factor is 0.02. That's the actual, that's what we transform their age to for the purpose of the calculation. So it's 0.02, and that comes from an actuarial table that we have available on our website. Their creditable service, in this particular case, this member's creditable service is 28.4. And what you'll notice is the creditable service is always truncated down to the nearest tenth. This is why every time we credit creditable service, we try to go 6 decimals. Then ultimately, once it's all accumulated, it gets dropped to the nearest tenth. And then this person's 3-year salary average is $100,000, just so that the math is kind of simple when you're seeing it, and hopefully makes the example a little easier. So their calculation would be their age factor times their service times their salary average. So it's going to be 0.02 times 28.4 times $100,000. And that's what somebody's option A benefit is. So in this case, it's $56,800. Relatively simple when you're looking at it from that perspective. Now there's a secondary factor chart that you can use if you're going to be offering that option C benefit I mentioned before, and that will lower. So your option A might be 56.8, but the option C benefit is a little bit less. But again, you're leaving a benefit not only for yourself, but for a first family member, which is a really common thing to happen. Now, one of the things we want to show here, though, and again, we have creditable service highlighted because that's the point of today's program. Service is a big component of what someone's benefit's going to be for the rest of their life. It really is the commodity of the MTRS. So, and for MTRS members and their benefits. So, I really wanted to show this calculation just to give you a better idea of exactly, what's at stake with creditable service. Now, when we're establishing creditable service, your employees earn service for every normal record, so they don't get it for adjustments or retro. Sometimes we will add a manual adjustment if their adjustment is some sort of a settlement or some sort of a correction. But normal records automatically will credit your employees with creditable service, and it's credited on a ratio of base earnings divided by full year full-time annual salary. Now, this might ring a bell. This is why your employer services rep is always, hounding you to make sure that your salaries are the full year full-time annual salary, because we want to make sure we're getting creditable service right. If that full year full-time salary is wrong, it's the divisor in this calculation, somebody's, service might be off, and hopefully we don't find ourselves in that position. And again, it really just shows the importance of the full year full-time salary being reported correctly in your deduction reports. Now, since we went to MyTRS in 2010, services is creditable service is credited to your employees when deductions are released into their account. So the moment we release a report, within seconds, that creditable service for the records within it immediately credits your members. And what you'll also see is that if those reports are not released, that credit's not there yet. And so we'll talk about the ramifications of that a little bit later. We're going to talk about that in much more depth. But again, keep this in mind as we're going forward. Getting those reports released is how people see their creditable service. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what if the base is different, right? So we're going to go into that in just 1 second. I just wanted to give an opportunity just to see if we have anything in the chat yet.
Hi, Bobby. We do not have any questions in the chat just yet.
Cool. All right. Thanks for that. Okay. So what happens when the base is different than what we're expecting for the base? So what the MTRS implemented is something called service correction codes. So we covered how it's calculated, right? And now we needed to come up with a way of handling when the base earnings are different than the base earnings expected. So you have someone and they're being reported at $60,000. They get 24 pays, right? So okay, we know how much that base is supposed to be. Now they're getting a different figure, right? And there's lots of legitimate reasons why that might be true, right? You might have somebody who's just getting mid-year salary adjustment. Maybe you're one of the school districts in your collective bargaining agreement that allows people to come in the middle of the year and say, hey, I got my master's, and then you recalculate them from that school day on, or the first school day of the next check, or however it works in your school district. They also might just be changing jobs. Maybe they went from being a classroom teacher and they got their assistant principal cert and a job opens up in the middle of the year. So now you're recalculating them to be an assistant principal, right? So that's a good example of where a mid-year salary adjustment is going to sort of factor in here, right? Now, let's say you have somebody sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. They've taken ill. They've unfortunately spent through a lot of their sick time. So now they're getting docked a day or two because they're out of sick time, but they're still ill. So that would be an example of a situation where, again, the earnings are going to be slightly off from what you're expecting because of a legitimate business reason, right? And then third, someone being prorated because they were a mid-year hire. So you have somebody, and most school districts will hire folks on the basis of, what number, or excuse me, they'll pay them on the basis of how many school days in a pro rata formula based on a full school year, right? So if you hire somebody in October and they're going to work 160 out of 180 school days, you're going to calculate that out and you divide it over the remaining number of checks, right? So because school days are sort of front loaded in the school calendar, the deeper into a school year, the more that ratio of salary and base earnings aren't going to look rational, right? Like they're not going to look like they make sense. So these are some of the scenarios where, again, the ratios don't look like they make sense, and we need to know what to do to kind of handle them. If we're just always applying the same blanket formula, it's going to be accurate in sometimes and it won't be accurate in others. So we tried to tackle that with service correction codes. So with service correction codes, now, as we were just mentioning, right, service correction codes are super important because they alter the person's creditable service as we're releasing your deduction reports. So it literally makes a big difference in somebody's creditable service. So we can say that, but I figured let's do a demonstration one, right? So we have an employee, her name is Jen Chen, and she's a full-time employee with an annual salary of $52,000. Now, that might sound a little low at this point, but it works out. The math works out really good with 26 pay, so we're just going to go with that. So she's a full-time employee. She makes $52,000 a year, and she's on a 26 pay schedule. So she gets $2,000 per check, right? Easy math. Now, for each pay date, she started in the beginning of the year. Everything looked great. She's getting about $2,000 a paycheck. She receives 0.038461 years of service, which is basically 1/26th of a year's salary. If she works all 26 pays and everything posts through fine, at the end of the year she's going to have 1 year of creditable service. Everything looks great. Now, let's say Jen goes out on unpaid leave and she receives her earnings payout in May. And let's say it's $10,440 in her last check, and it's just one of the pay dates in May, right? Okay. So now, when you're looking at the credible service codes we have, and we're going to go through them all one by one, but this is the common mistake we have because unfortunately the label I think can be a little misleading. And so we have the label UL unpaid leave. Now we're going to talk about what that code's really for. It's really like if they're having a tiny little encapsulated leave, like if they're getting docked a couple of days pay, and I'll talk about it more specifics later. But if you use this correction code, Jen is only going to get 0.03461 years of service. So she's going to get exactly 1/26th of a year of service. Well, she's getting out 10 grand, not $2,000, right? So she's owed more than 5 paychecks worth of creditable service. So as a result, if this doesn't get caught, Jen will be shorted 0.162308 years of service. So it's almost 16% of a year of service, right? Or a little more than 16% of a whole year of service just because of a bad code. So it's just an example, and we see these kinds of cases all the time where we have to reach out to the school and say, hey, what really happened here? Like, I think you have the wrong code, that sort of thing. So it's just an example, and this was a real case, and it really was coded wrong, and somehow someone missed it, so they called us about their cred service report. And so the kind of thing you just want to be careful of when you're working on your deduction reports. Now, since Jen was being paid out all of her earnings for the summer, that, basically everything she had earned through that point in the year before she went on leave of absence. The proper code would be payout. And what payout's going to do is it's going to say, look, I know it's more than 126 of the year service. No problem. That's correct. She should get the full 0.20 years of service, technically 0.20769. And that way she gets her full service for not only that pay period, but everything she'd accrued that normally would have been sort of squirreled away for the summer pay. All right, so just an example that we've seen before, and why it's always important that we're careful about the service codes. And we're going to go through each code in just one moment. Do we have anything in the chat yet?
Yes, we do.
Cool.
First question. We have an employee that will be taking 53 unpaid days leave of absence. They would like that distributed throughout the year as to not interrupt deductions for insurance. Is there a problem doing that, or does it have to wait until they're actually in the unpaid portion of the leave?
Great question. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover that. So I'm just going to ask that we place that one on hold. It's called stretch pay, and I promise we actually have a slide on that. So we'll circle back to that in about 4 slides.
Great. One more question. Actually, it looks like we got a couple more. How does the lump sum payments factor into the 26 pays for service credit?
So with lump sum, meaning, and just in case there's anybody on here who doesn't process payroll with lump sum is basically when a school district is going to pay everybody up before the summer. So they might give out 5 or 6 or 7 paychecks all on the same day. So we have a mechanism in the calendar, and that will be covered in deduction reporting. So that'll be in one of the trainings that are coming up. And so we'll talk about in that depth there. But just know that we have a calendar. And what that calendar is going to do is it's going to signify to the reporting module, this is this school's lump sum day. And with that, MyTRS will look to see if it's more than one pay date, and it will allow it to go through. And then it will give it the full pro rata. So if you're paying out 6 checks all in one record, they're going to get 6 checks worth of creditable service. The full divisor of the inflated base earnings divided by the FTE salary.
Thanks, Bobby. That's it for now. We have a couple of chats going on that are active, but no further questions at this point.
Cool. Okay. And we will cover that in more depth as far as the lump sum pay. That will just happen as part of the deduction reporting training, the last one we're going to do. So please join us for that as well. All right. So in the service correction code, so we're going to go through a few of these. Okay. So the first one, we're going to talk about the mid-year codes, right? So the first one's mid-year hire. The first application for this is probably pretty darn intuitive. You have somebody who's starting in the middle of the year, so you're prorating them based on the number of days that they missed. So, you have 180 days, let's say, or 182 days in your school year. They're only going to work 156. You're going to figure out exactly how many school days they were going to work. You're going to divide the 156 by 182, and then just give them whatever they're getting divided by whatever number of pay dates you have left. That seems to be what every school district does. And all that's going to be fine. So as long as you're reporting the proper full year, full-time salary, we're going to take that base pay. And let's say they ended up working 67.4% of the year. At the end of the year, they're going to get 0.674 years of service. It's going to match exactly the ratio that you're paying them based on the number of school days they worked in comparison to their peers working the full year. So that's the mid-year hire code. Now, we also use mid-year hire because we didn't want to give you like 50 codes. We have it for a couple of other purposes, and they kind of work in the same way. So the first one's a change in FTE percentage. So you have somebody, they start out the year as a 0.8 and then they drop to a 0.6. So they start as a 0.6 and then they pick up a class. And now they're going to be a 0.8 for the rest of the year. Great. If you really think about it, in essence, that really is still the same mid-year calc, right? You're going to figure out how many days were at 0.6, how many were at 0.8. You're going to prorate them. So as long as you have their proper full year, full-time salary, mid-year hire is going to be listed on their record, and it's going to give them the exact pro rata. So if they worked part of the year is a 0.6, part is a 0.8. Let's say it averages out to 0.72 years of service. At the end of the year, they're going to get 0.72 years of service from us, based on the fact that you're reporting them correctly. Now, another one, a little more rare, generally because of a mistake, I think, but sometimes you'll get a change in pay frequency. Someone will show up and they'll be like, hey, you set me up this year as a 21, but I'm supposed to be a 26. Okay, well, if you've already given them a couple checks as a 21, you can't just make them a full 26. You're going to have to prorate them down. But again, this formula may sound awfully familiar. It's going to be the same exact process you go through for mid-year hires. Again, this is why we're using the mid-year hire code. And then last but not least, let's say you have somebody who gets hired. I kid you not, I once had a situation where on the first day of school, if school started at 9 o'clock, they had an employee who was interviewed at 8 o'clock to take a school teaching position. The principal hired them 10 minutes before the school year started. Now, clearly, payroll was not going to find out for their first check, right? So what happens, and sometimes even when it's much earlier, they still forget to tell you, right? So let's say you have somebody, they don't get their first check, whatever the reason is, no matter how crazy the scenario, or just maybe somebody made a mistake. So on the second check, you're giving them 2 checks worth of pay. So we're going to use mid-year hire for that too, because it's going to stack up their service. So you're giving them 2 checks worth of pay, exactly what you should do, and then mid-year hire is going to give them 2 paychecks worth of creditable service. Easy peasy, and it works out perfect. Okay. And we use mid-year hire for these because they're really all about that same formula, that same sort of mental approach when you're calculating. Now, the next code, also a mid-year code, is mid-year term or death. So this would be if somebody's leaving service, they're leaving employment in the middle of the year, or God forbid they pass away, while an active employee. So you just put on mid-year term. Hopefully it's for a much happier reason than passing away. Hopefully they're just retiring in March for some reason. Maybe they have a March birthday or something. So you'd put in MT as their code. And then if you're paying them out prorated because they probably had money that was accruing for the summer or that kind of thing. Again, MyTRS will give them the perfect pro rata for credible service. So if you pay them out for 51% of the year, they're going to end up with 0.51 years of service with the MTRS. Any questions on either of those codes?
We do have a question in the chat. If a
Cool.
contractual stipend gets paid after a lump sum payroll during the summer, the base salary equals 0. The amount is listed in the stipend field. What code will override this error?
You don't want a service correction code for that. You want to make the record itself a retroactive record. And we're going to cover that in the deduction reporting. So I'll say that much for now, but we will cover that in depth. It's going to be one of the examples we have in the deduction reporting training, which is 2 trainings from now. So about 2 weeks from now. All right.
Thanks, Bobby.
Sure. So the next service code is for salary change mid-period. So salary change mid-period is going to be a little different, right? So this isn't somebody you're hiring in the middle of the year. This is going to be somebody who's, on the payroll. They're having some kind of a pay recalculation. The key here is that they're not having any kind of fluctuation in service. They're not changing FTEs. They're not a partial pay. This has nothing to do with a leave of absence. This is just a good old-fashioned, almost always a raise, maybe a demotion, or maybe they were accidentally overpaid or underpaid, right? They show up and they're like, hey, I would love to have the salary rate, but I don't have my master's. I only have my bachelor's. I think you set me up wrong, right? So now you're going to prorate them down for the rest of the year. And really, there's no change in their FTE. It's just a matter of salary change, okay? And what this is going to do is we're going to bypass that first calculation of earnings against salary. We're just going to give them one pay date of credit for every time we have this code. So the reason we do this, let's say you have somebody and they're doing really well. They were a classroom teacher. Let's say they're making 80 grand a year as a classroom teacher. An assistant principal job opens. They just got their license. So now you're hiring them in March to be an assistant principal. All right. You recalculate them as a teacher, probably have to pay them out. Then you start paying them as an assistant principal. Right. Well, they didn't work the whole year as an assistant principal. Right. And so the salary, the full year, full-time salary, which we do still required reporting, if you compared their earnings, right, because they're kind of like a mid-year hire as a principal, but they're not really a mid-year hire. They were there the whole year, right? And so that ratio is not going to look good, especially if you have somebody, let's say it's not for a new job. Let's say it's, they quite frankly went from being a bachelor's to a master's or a master's to a doctorate, all right? So they've been doing the job all year long. Their salary goes up 8 grand or something, but their base is only going to go up a prorated portion of that, right? Because they're only getting paid that new salary for the remainder of the year. So if we were using that base against the new salary, they would actually get undercredited with service because it's not going to look like a full proportion. And that's what SC will take care of for us. It's like, okay, look, it's salary only. Great to them. They got a raise in the middle of the year. No problem. They put this code on and they're going to continue earning one pay date of credit all year long. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, the key here with salary change mid-period, these are situations where there is no change in FTE. There is no expected impact on their creditable service. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. All right, hopefully that makes sense. So the next one's going to be an unpaid leave. Okay. So I apologize for the person who asked the 50-day thing. It's more than 4 slides, but I promise we are going to get back to you. I didn't forget you. So the next two codes are unpaid leave and payout. So unpaid leave is like if you're docking somebody a day or two. Technically, that when you dock them a day's pay, that in and of itself is a small unpaid leave. So they get full service up to 30 days, and that's what unpaid leave is going to do. It's going to say, okay, I understand that the earnings dropped, but we're going to still give you a full year of service, or excuse me, a full paycheck of service. Payout, on the other hand, is going to prorate, right? So you're paying them out because they only have enough days left to for like a half a paycheck before they go on unpaid leave. You're paying them out because they're leaving for the year, but they're going to return next year. I mean, it's almost exclusively used for people going on leave of absence if you're paying them out. There could potentially be another use for that, but it's almost exclusively to that point where folks are being paid out a bundle of cash, then they're going to go on some sort of unpaid leave, and so you would use payout so that it gives them the proper pro rata depending on what you're paying them. And then once the person is on leave, there are a couple of other codes that are similar, right? So payouts, like you're going to give them their cash, they're going to go on unpaid leave status before they go, and now they're not getting, they fall off payroll, if you will, until they return to service. Okay. Now, there's prorated paid leave, and then there's returned from leave. Sometimes you'll have somebody that goes right from being a PL to an RL in the same school year. Now, a PL would be if they're getting prorated, either because you're implementing stretch pay. So this is where I mentioned earlier, the person with the 53-day thing, right? So there's going to be a service, a leave of absence form that you need to fill out. We're going to show you what that looks like in just a couple slides. But this would be how you'd code it. So you're like, okay, they're going to have 53 days out. They're going to have 61 days in. Their ratio is going to probably look like, 45% of what their normal paycheck looks like, depending on the situation. And so what this code tells us to do is, yes, we know it's lower. They were on prorated leave, and this is why. And then we're going to ask for that leave of absence form to give us all the details. And the idea behind that is we're doing this as they're happening, like as the leaves are happening, so that when people go to apply for a benefit, you don't have to send somebody in the dungeon looking for, hey, why did Sarah fall off payroll back in 2024? I think in Worcester, they're still looking for a couple guys that were looking for records, right? So, the idea is we're capturing all this in real time as it's happening. We're capturing the leave of absence form, and then 2 decades from now, if someone goes to pay a benefit, we've got all the details we need to make sure we get their creditable service correct. So PL, you're going to use if it's the person is physically out and they're getting prorated pay, or if it's an advance. Sometimes folks might know, okay, I'm going to take a leave. It's October. I think I'm going on leave in February. I'm going to have some unpaid days. And so, their employer might even offer to prorate them early just to sort of stretch it out even further and reduce the pain, if you will. And so if you do that, then you want to choose the PL, even though their actual leave doesn't start too much later. If you're prorating them early, just to help sort of, reduce the pain, if you will, while they're on leave, that's okay. And that's the code you'd use. And then you just give a quick comment saying, I know their leave doesn't start to February, but we started reducing her in November because, she gave us notice. And then last but not least would be a partially paid sabbatical. We don't see a lot of these, but I actually saw one of these last week. So let's say somebody's taking a year off for educational purposes and the school's going to pay them half time, then you'd use the PL code for that halftime pay throughout the year. So return from leave. So basically, it's sort of the same concept, except that the pro rata is happening because the person's coming back from their leave. So what they're doing is they're going to get prorated because they were out for a number of days. Now they're working full time, but you're doing that like mid-year hire sort of calculation, right? And instead of being a mid-year hire, even though it is really the same calculation as the mid-year hire, it's really all been triggered by the fact that they're coming back from leave. So they're coming back on April 4th. You're figuring out, okay, between April 4th and June 17th, we have this many school days, but we have 8 checks, so that RL will tell us why their pay looks like it dips significantly. And then it goes back up and, whenever the new school year starts up there. All right. Scott, do we have any questions on these?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. One is from a few minutes ago, but the question is, if a check is missed, could you also use the SC code?
I would say if a check is missed, there's going to be service because the service was missed, right? So we don't want to use the SC code because even though you are paying them, we want to use that MH code. So because I assume you're going to double up their check. You can't prorate that for the rest of the year. You owe them the money immediately. So that's going to be that MH double up situation.
Great. One more question. What
Sure.
happens if an employee has a lot of random unpaid days and we use the UL, nothing consistent? Does that catch up with them?
What I would say is you might get more questions back because what we're trying to do from your employer services rep. So every once in a while, people have a situation like this, right? And it's legitimate. They miss 2 days here, unrelated. 2 weeks later, they miss a day, unrelated. 3 weeks later, they miss a day. So in those kinds of situations, you want to use UL and you want to give a comment basically in the deduction report to just sort of back it up. Like, yeah, I know she's been UL 4 checks in a row, but these are all separate incidents. So, and if this happens to somebody, they tend to be the target or the most likely person for it to happen to, right? Because A, they were sick enough to draw down their sick time, right? And then on top of that, so they're going to be more likely probably to get sick again, right? So they must be going through some sort of health related issue. Maybe they have a family member going through health related issue. So sometimes you just kind of get that. So if that's what's going on, and this isn't a case where you're stretching it out, you're not averaging it. It just so happens, a day and a half here, 5 hours on one check, just make sure you're giving good comments to your ESR so they know that it's not a misunderstanding of using PL or RL. It's actually legitimately UL, and she just has some sporadic days off.
Great. That's it for now. Thanks, Bobby.
Cool. Thank you very much, Scott. All right. So the last three codes we're going to talk about, these are the ones that don't get used nearly as often as some, the other ones, right? So unpaid snow day. I have no idea why somebody would do this to their payroll officer, that they would dock people if you have a snow day. They used to do this a lot. And then I think business managers or whomever is in charge were kind of like, this is stupid. Everything gets averaged anyway. We're not going to do that. I hope you don't have to deal with this. But we gave you a code just in case. Disciplinary leave. This will be if somebody's placed on disciplinary leave, that's probably pretty straightforward, but it doesn't necessarily have to be crime related, but you will get a question on whether or not it was crime related. And if you've not gone through the program for the introduction to the MTRS, please do. I actually have a section on some legal responsibilities that employers have if there's a expected crime. Now, just because someone's being investigated, just because somebody might even be indicted, they're not going to lose their pension necessarily, right? So, but it's important that the MTRS and employers have a legal obligation to make sure that they're making us aware. Now, if this is a disciplinary leave because an employee, told the principal to go take a hike, right? So it's not criminal. They just, lost their cool one day, so they got suspended for a day or something. That's fine. Just say non-criminal, just in disagreement or whatever, and then that way we just know, like, oh, okay, so it is disciplinary leave, but it's not. There's no criminal component to it. So the last one is unpaid strike days. Unfortunately, these are starting to become a thing, right? So, a little bit more now than I think in the past. So if you run into a situation where you're docking people for strike days, this is a code you can use if they're having unpaid strike days. Hopefully things can get resolved soon enough that you don't have to go this route, but it is a code that we offer just so that, we don't want you picking like a code that doesn't make sense. All right. Are there any questions on the SC codes for now? We are going to talk about events and leave of absences and stuff a little more in depth in just a moment.
No questions in the chat right now.
Cool. All right. So, it's super important that we get these codes right. We talked about the formula and how they impact. So now let's talk about the roster. So in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 32, in their infinite wisdom, when they wrote the pension system, it occurred to them that if they have changes in personnel, they're going to have to, you're going to have to reach out and tell the retirement board, right? And what we tried to get away from years ago was technically a requirement by the school to write us a letter every time someone terminates, every time they change jobs, every time they go on leave of absence, if they return from leave of absence, you were legally required to write us a letter. This is much better than that. So we're going to give you a combination of being able to see your roster, manage your roster, and then occasionally we will have some forms. And we're gonna, I have not missed the fact that we still have to cover the 53-day situation on the leave form. So we're gonna cover that in just a minute. Okay, so employers are required by law to tell us within 30 days of employing any new personnel. Okay, it's in the statute. And you're also required by law within 30 days to tell us if there's any kind of change in title, job, anything that would qualify them possibly for a reevaluation of membership. Okay. Now, during membership eligibility, we talked about this a little bit. And again, every time somebody has a good qualifying event, you got to make sure that they're still MTRS eligible, right? And this sort of facilitates some of that as well. So we gave access to members to something called the roster. Now, keep in mind, we're gonna mention employee registration, but that was covered in membership eligibility. So if you didn't see that, please go back to that video and we walk you through actually registering a member. So here, this is a copy of a roster, right? So this is for the Blackboard Public Schools, and you can see their employees here, and you can see their membership numbers. You can see whether or not, in this particular school over in Blackboard, they're not doing a good job following up on people's enrollments, though you'll see a lot of them are future enrollments. So it's not too bad. They have some people who started in, right around in 2014 and they still haven't followed up with them on enrollment. So we'll have to get on Andy Admin about that. But, here you can see all of your people. And when you register somebody brand new, they will default to the top of the page. You can also sort it by the different columns. So it kind of depends if you just have the default sort on or not. In the top right-hand corner, you can see the register employee. So you can not only get to that from the homepage, but you can get to it here from the roster. And if you're wondering how you get to the roster, if you look over in the blue margin on the left, the margin that's highlighted in white is the employee roster. So you have access to your roster anytime you'd like it. Now I'm going to go on to the next slide. And so as part of the roster, we're going to have you, you're required to fill in some employment events. Think of it as for every creditable service impacting sort of qualified leave, kind of similar to health insurance in the sense that there are certain qualifying events, if you will, but these are employment events. Basically, if something is happening in a person's career that could affect their creditable service, they need a row. Okay, so we're going to start with, the first event in the actual profile getting added to the roster happens during registration. Again, we cover registration in depth in the membership eligibility video. Now, additional contributing events can be added to a person throughout their career. Either they're coming back from leave of absence, maybe you're putting in a different one for a different FTE. You can do that. Sometimes you'll see it broken down different rows depending on when someone changed FTE. That's always okay. But that's what contributing events do. Basically, it's restoring or setting up an employee in a status where they're going to be contributing to the MTRS. Okay. Now, termination events. So a person leaves service, right? And there are 3 different termination types. There's voluntary, right? So either the person's contract is expired because they volunteered to only have a contract for that time period. Even if their employer doesn't renew, it was voluntary that it be for a fixed amount of time. So that still counts as a voluntary resignation. That's important because if they take a refund, they get better interest. So it's better to make sure we have that coded correctly. You might have involuntary termination. So that would be disciplinary, or if someone's just being fired for some reason. And then the last one being job elimination. So their job no longer exists. They're getting rid of the position all out or outright. Those are kind of rare. Sometimes you'll be questioned on those. Like, are you really not bringing back this position? There isn't another position that the person could float into, that kind of thing. Now, this brings us, so that, that's terminating people, contributing. Those tend to be a little simpler. Leave of absence is where things get a little murky and complicated, right? Excuse me. So employees earn free credit for up to 30 calendar days on an unpaid leave. So that's why when a person's docked like 2 days and we give them an unpaid leave, I know you're probably thinking to yourself, I wouldn't really call that an unpaid leave, but legally it is. And that's why it scales them up to getting a full check of credit when you pick the unpaid leave code. Now, there's unpaid leave where you have somebody and they go out and, she's going to be on leave for 60 days. She has 40 paid sick days. 20 will be without pay. So after the 40th paid sick day, she just falls off payroll. right? So this would be either somebody who gets a payout code before they go on leave, or they just get entered as an unpaid leave and they're not showing up for paychecks. They would kind of have to have like the perfect amount of leave to end on a perfect paycheck. That's probably pretty rare. So they're probably going to be a PO before they go out. Now, the second example is actually the exact scenario someone brought up earlier about the 53 days. They're going to stretch them out to make sure that they stay on pay, um, while they're receiving their leave, right? So she's going to be on 60, same kind of leave, right? So Sally Smith would be out on 60 days. She has 40 paid sick days and 20 without pay. And instead of having Sally go without a paycheck, the school prorates her the entire leave, with just a lower biweekly. Okay. And that's we refer to that as stretch pay. So essentially, she really is on an unpaid leave for those 40, for that 20-day period, but it's all just getting stretched out in the way she's paid. Okay. And the leave of absence form is going to be very key for that. So we're going to talk about that form in just a minute. You also might have folks that are placed on a prorated leave, right? So prorated leave, this isn't a period of like paid leave and unpaid leave. This is they're getting prorated as they're paying it, right? So it would be like a, prorated sabbatical. In this example, Janira Vasquez is granted a paid sabbatical for educational advancement from her employer, right? And so this is just a random fake member that we're saying, okay, you're paying them half time to go out for, to enhance their education. And so that's where it would be considered a prorated leave. Now, all leave of absence require an LOA form. We're going to show you what that looks like in just one sec. And there are a couple of other leaves that just have slightly different rules. So they might be an unpaid leave, like an active military leave or workers' compensation leave. We're going to talk about those in just a minute, but please keep in mind they use a different form, okay? But for all of the other leave of absences, you're going to use this leave of absence form. So if you were to look closely, first, we do mention stretch pay in the margin so that, it's covered right on the form. We try to give an expectation of when this form is due, right? So I had a question recently and they said, hey, what if someone goes on leave, but they have enough time to cover it? They just have no fluctuation in pay. Well, there's going to be no credible service event. You technically don't even have to report that to us. We do enable you. You can put them in as a leave of absence fully paid. We do give you that event just in case somebody wants it recorded. But technically, where there's no fluctuation in pay, no fluctuation in service, you don't even have to report it to us. For instance, you don't have to give us a leave of absence every time someone takes a sick day and they have sick time in their queue, right? There's no extra coding for that. Now, with the leave of absence form, if you look carefully at the fields that are on the leave of absence form, these are probably going to be kind of logical, right? These are all the days that the person in payroll trying to figure out how they're going to pay somebody. This is all the data they're going to accumulate. Okay, well, when was the last day in work? Are they going to miss a check? How many days are they going to be unpaid? How many days are they going to be paid? Are we stretching them out? When do they expect to return to the office? When are they, what's their first paycheck after coming back? If you really think about it, it's all the same stuff. So if you have someone going on leave, and sometimes I'll have folks say to me like, "Oh man, I already did all this when I was calculating their leave." I said, "Yeah, you should have just filled in the form when you were calculating their leave." Like if you do it at the same time, you'll find you have all this data so that you can calculate them in the first place. It's the perfect time to fill out one of these sheets. Now, sometimes things change. So you'll see that we ask, well, when do they expect to come back? When are they expected to have their first paycheck? What's their FTE expected, right? Because when people go on unpaid leave, let's say, for instance, it's childbearing leave, things change. They might say to themselves, well, instead of taking care of other kids, people's kids in school, I want to take care of my own, right? Something like that. So their dates might change some. So you can always submit another whole form if like a revised form, if the facts are so much different. Or you can just give us a form and just send the original one, and then you can send the difference there in box M where it has the explanations. Okay. Sometimes you'll also have a situation where, let's say, an employee situation is just extra. It was complicated. There were medical complications. They were going to go out one day, then they didn't, and then they did, and whatever that situation is. That's why we give you box M. So please put in that information. If I had one and the school's complication was, relatively simple. They were supposed to prorate them starting in, say, April, and for whatever reason, they didn't start prorating them till May, right? So they put in the event for April and everything. Somehow it got missed, and so they prorated them even more, but they started May, right? No big deal. So they can put in, all the information here, and they can say, yeah, I know it looks weird that we didn't prorate them until May, but just human error, right? I mean, that'd be the perfect example of something you could put in box in. If it's so crazy that you have to attach other paperwork, you can do that too. And just, if it's just easier, you have other forms. I will say, please don't just bypass this form by saying, please see attached and start sending us all your personnel forms. If your ESR is not comfortable with the formatting of your personnel forms or where to find the data, we're going to push it back and say, we need you to fill out a form. But sometimes, we might get a leave of absence form and then might have C attached. And there also might be a letter from the superintendent explaining what happened. Okay. So, and if that's the case that you need, that's always okay. That's kind of the idea of giving you sort of a catch-all solution. All right. So that's the LOA form. Scott, do we have anybody?
We
Questions?
do have we got a couple. When it comes to notifying within 30 days, does putting that in the monthly report count?
Yes. So from a perspective of, well, when I say the report, though, I should take it back a step. Putting on the deduction report is absolutely helpful. But if the person needs an event, that also has to happen in the system, right? So I'm going to talk about this in a little bit in a slide or two, but keep in mind, if the person falls off payroll, just writing in the deduction report, person fell off payroll, no, that's not good enough. You have to add in an event. And I'm actually going to show you what an event looks like. So let's just look at that. So for instance, here we have Verada Tatal, and she is, a member in the system and obviously a fake member. And you can see that she has 3 different events. So you can see she started as a contributing member. She goes on leave of absence shortly after starting. So she goes on leave of absence in February 2024. She comes back later in February 2024, and you can see her effective pay date. So the components for each one of these is probably going to make a lot of sense, right? You're going to have a start date, you're going to have a stop date, and then you're going to tell us what day it actually affects payroll, because we know sometimes the payroll date is almost irrespective of when the start and stop dates of the leave are. But the start and stop dates give us a good approximation when the leave happens. And then we couple this with the LOA form, and then we'll know exactly what happened and how we should treat the person for creditable service. Now, keep in mind, the effective pay date is super important for deduction reporting, because the effective pay date is going to tell us, if it's a contributing effective pay date, it's going to tell us when we should start to expect deductions for that person. If it's a non-contributing, like a leave of absence or a termination, that effective pay date is going to tell us when we should no longer expect deductions, right? So keep in mind, particularly for terminations, for that effective pay date, you don't want to put their last check there. It's such a habit for people, or such an instinct. But really, we want to know the first check they're not going to get, okay? And it really can be anywhere between the check date and the next check date based on their calendar. So if someone's last check is going to be on June 16th, and you're like, I'm not sure if the next payroll is going to be June 30th or July 1st, no problem. As long as it's anywhere between the 16th and the 30th, and you're telling us they're no longer going to seek contributions, by the time the 30th rolls around, my trust knows that they're not an active person on the roster. Hopefully that makes some sense.
Great, thank you. One additional question.
Sure.
Actually, I've got a couple. When pay is adjusted due to a short-term disability payment being deducted, what code would be used for that differential in pay?
So if somebody is getting short-term disability from, I'm guessing from a third party, maybe Aflac or something like that, that pay is not being paid by the employer. So that's basically, it sort of depends on how long. It's basically treat that like they're not being paid. So if we're talking a couple days, you probably go with unpaid leave. If it's a longer period of time, I'm guessing for short-term disability, it's probably multiple checks and that sort of thing. We would treat that as an unpaid leave over time, and we might need a leave of absence form and go with a prorating code for that.
Great. Next question. When a leave of absence is not linear, meaning they are having prorated checks for the 60-day leave with 20 days of pay spread over the months of the leave. So the dates are not linear in nature for the unpaid and paid days on the form. Do you just put date range for a full 60 days in paid and unpaid section of the form?
Well, they would technically be linear, right? Because if you have, let's say it's 60 days, so they have 40 days that are paid. And so that would be the next 40 school days for the person, right? And then they fall into unpaid status for the 20 days after that. Because the whole idea of the 60 days is that you figure out that they're going to be out for 60 school days, right? So you would list the first 40 as paid days in, I want to say it's box G. Let's go back a step here. Getting rusty on where the form is, right? So yeah, G would be the expected, pardon me. F would be the number of paid days, and then G would be the number of unpaid days. So in theory, in that example, even though they're kind of getting blended, really, the first 40 school days would go in F, right? Because that's going to be the 40 days where they're getting paid. And then the 20 school days after that would go in G.
Okay, great. Last question for now. I'm sort of confused about work days or school days to use. We are a charter school. We have the same number of school days as any other public school, 180. And we also include required pre and post school PD days in the employment agreements. Our agreements state that up to 5 before and 5 after could be required. This comes up when filling out the various MTRS forms, not on a monthly basis, for individual employees.
Sure. So a great example of this would probably be guidance counselors in non-charter schools, right? So if you have an employee in their particular position requires 190 days instead of 182, then the 190 is your basis, right? I presume you're saying they're required to do it. So if they're not going to be there, they're going to have to take a sick day, right? Or a vacation day not to be there, right? There's an expectation that they have to be there if it's one of their work days. So if it's one of those days, then it gets factored into the calculation. If it's, well, I mean, they can really do any part of the summer. If they didn't do it, they're not really going to get docked or anything. They're not really going to get in trouble. Well, then you're not really requiring them to do it. So sometimes the summer days get a little crazy because somebody, we'll have people on one end say like, "Oh no, they're required, they have to do it," and then you're like, "What happens if they don't?" They're like, "Well, so they really have to be required to meet that. Required is required, right? So if it is one of those, then you're looking at the 190 situation.
Great. That's all the questions for now.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so active military leave. So if you have somebody who gets called to active military leave, we did talk about active military leave more in the first section or the introduction training, so we're not going to cover that in depth here, okay? But really just know if you have someone who's on active leave, you have to put in an event for them, right? It's going to possibly alter their creditable service. There's two versions of the active military leave. There are some employers that will pay somebody from the school district while they're on active military leave. Let's say you pay them a differential or something. So if you're paying them anything as an active employee while they're on active military leave, you still take deductions from the wages you're paying them. And then at the end, you would have to figure out if the employer would still have to buy their creditable service for the portion that they would have owed had they not left service, as so long as they come back within 2 years of active duty and they were honorably discharged. For more information on exactly when that qualifies, really pleased to see the first presentation. But what we wanted to make a point is that here, that you really need to also put in events for them. So to be just like a leave of absence, hold on, let me go to this screen real quick. Again, you have the leave of absence that's in the middle there, except instead of leave of absence, if you were in the drop down, you choose military leave of absence. And that tells us like, oh, okay, they were called to active duty. Now, if you have somebody who gets called for 2 days to the National Guard, you don't have to do that. This will be extended leaves. Like basically try to think of it as the rule of thumb, if you will, would be to go with like the 30-day leave rule, right? So if you have somebody and they're out 3 days, you're just going to hit them with unpaid admin leave. We're not going to bill you for the 3 days. However, if it's a longer period of time, that's when it's going to kick in with the active military rules. All right. And hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So now you got workers' comp. So with workers' compensation, I'm checking here. Oh, it looks like I'm in danger of going over. I'm going to try and get through this. So for workers' compensation, there was a very lengthy and confusing court process that happened over many years. You've gotten different, we got different advice on what to do based on as the court case worked its way through the courts. One appeal court, upheld the decision, another one denied it, and then ultimately went to the SJC, and then the legislature changed some stuff. So for workers' compensation, if you have a person on workers' compensation, you have gotten advice from us in the past that is different from this, and that's because the law changed. Okay, so if you have someone on workers' compensation, please know if they're on full incapacitation, they're going to get free they're going to get a creditable service for that time because it's not their fault that they were injured during work. Um, but you want to make sure you're putting in not only a leave of absence for them, but a workers' compensation leave of absence. That way we know, like, oh, wait a minute, this has different rules. We want to make sure they're getting their service. Okay. Now for workers' comp, there's two different kinds, which is section 34 and section 35. So section 34, the more common one I think happens with schools, is like someone's fully incapacitated. God forbid, we've had teachers who fall off a stage, fall downstairs, a piece of a ceiling collapsed on somebody once. So if you have somebody who's hurt at work, and they're fully incapacitated, it's important that we have the right leave in there because they're going to get that service. As long as we can prove they're in workers' comp, they get that service without paying a thing. Okay. So if they're out for 5 weeks in the middle of the year, now they may pull their cred service report. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a minute, but they may look like it's missing. If we know it's workers' comp, we have to retroactively go in there, make sure we tidy it all up, and we'll give them full service for that time. Now, if you have somebody who's out, you cannot take deductions from supplemental pay while they're not working. So in your district, you might say, oh, but we're going to pay them the extra 30%. So they're out 60, we're going to pay them 40. The rule is you should not be taking deductions from that sick time. That is different than we have told you in the past. We've been trying to tell folks the last couple of years not to, and more we're trying to get the word out. However, it is important that you not take deductions from that. If we find that we did take deductions from that, we need to collect some information on them because we have to give it back to them. Okay, they're still going to get the service for that if they're on full incapacitation. All right, so that's key. So they're not actually losing anything; they're actually just getting some money back. So in theory, as long as they know all that, they should be happy. Now, if you have somebody and they're on partial incapacitation, and so they're working, let's say they've been cleared to work 50% time, right? So you're going to pay them 50% time. The 50% time does have MTRS deductions on it. That's different. It's not full incapacitation and you're paying them out of a sick time bank or something. This is they've come back to work. They're partially incapacitated. And if that's the case, then you do take deductions from them, from their wages as a partially incapacitated person. Okay. Now, if that person who's on partial incapacitation, right? Let's say they injured their back and now they're coming back and they're only working half time until they can be strong enough to do full time. Okay. They happen to get the flu. They take a sick day for their partial incapacitation. Then you would take a deduction. That's just a good old fashioned sick day. So again, they're working, they're in partial incapacitation. For the time you're normally paying them as wages, they can have sick or vacation time during that partial incapacitation working time. All right. I know it's a little confusing, but hopefully that makes sense. Anything you're paying them to just supplement their pay while they're out does not have MTRS deductions on it. And, I mentioned that we need to collect some information on it. We're still kind of working on this. There's obviously a huge backlog with deduction reports, which is really hurting us. So we're kind of, have on split duty with this. But if you do know of any cases where deductions may have come out improperly, we'll certainly work with you because we want to make sure we get those deductions back to your employees. If you're going to send us info, if you could give us their name, the last four of their SSN, please do not send their full social security number, especially in email. But we'll work with you to try and get it refunded because we don't want to hold their deductions if we weren't supposed to get them. Now, much like the leave of absence form, we have a workers' compensation leave form. And as you can think of, if you think about it, right, section 34 versus 35. So it's really complicated. And we need to collect information that very specifically pertains to the workers' comp. So you'll see that's why we have the form for that. And if you have a question on this, because most people probably don't run into this a whole lot, reach out to your employer services rep, and one of us can certainly help you fill out the form or help you understand it when you're going through. Now, one other thing. So with all these complications with creditable service, you'll notice that sometimes we reach out about creditable service requests. So especially if we've had people in our system for a long time, maybe pre-MyTRS, when we're going to state someone's creditable service, we might be looking for information from their employer because we're kind of checking our notes, right? Occasionally we'll do a cred service request from somebody and they're like, oh yeah, they've been working here 30 years. And we look up their account. We're like, what? We've only had them for 28, Now, sometimes it's just an honest mistake, or it could be an indication that there was something wrong and we had no idea. Okay. So that's what that's all about. I think they're pretty straightforward. Let us know if you have questions when you get them, but please just know that they're really important. Now, maintaining your roster and deduction reporting. So I think this really ties back to the question we got of, hey, if I put it on the deduction report, isn't that good enough? So very quickly, if you think about it, each month your deduction reports are checked against your roster to make sure that everyone being reported is in a contributing status, right? And we also make sure that everyone who's in a contributing status is on the report. We use a payroll calendar, and it helps identify when somebody should be there, but they come up as missing. You'll see you have a missing member report. We do not move on from that without having it resolved. So, if Jane's missing, we want to know why Jane's missing. Jane's missing because she was terminated. If you terminate Jane, she's no longer missing. The system will now know why she's not on the deduction report. It is important when you're submitting your reports that you get all of that resolved. We're going to talk about that in deduction reporting. But again, all this stuff really is key in getting deduction reports resolved and released as fast as possible. Please make sure you're taking care of this part of your business before you're submitting your deduction reports. It is super important for us. And it's also super important to getting the deduction reports caught up. Keep in mind that all of these checks are really built to help alleviate or detect issues that could become really big issues for your members' creditable service. And that's what this is all about. It's about trying to find things in real time so that hopefully we can, if someone's not having deductions by accident, or maybe they were transitioned over to an MTRS job and you accidentally left them in the local board, stuff like that. We want to get it, taken care of as quickly as we can to, minimize the damage. Okay. Now, in addition to earning their credible service as a member, sometimes you hear about people purchasing service. Every once in a while, I'll get a question like, well, to get to 80%, this person needs 34.5 years of service. They've got 34. They were wondering if they can just buy 0.5 years. No, it doesn't work that way. There are some very specific kinds of service people can buy, like if they previously refunded service, or if they had time as a substitute teacher where they weren't eligible for the retirement system, other mass service, VOCAD, military time. So this is a list of all the different forms. All these forms are available on our external site, but please know that it's a finite list and it can only be purchased when people qualify, and this is the full list of things that they can possibly buy. Now, sort of the culmination of this whole process is that members can sign in to see their service, right? And we try to go out of our way to say, hey, look, this is estimated, right? And it's really important that you have an idea of how this looks, because we need to work together to get a lot of reports caught up. And so wholeheartedly, I'm going to show you some of the information we've shared with members to let them know we were a part of this problem, but we really need to get a better working relationship with monitoring, administering the maintenance on rosters as part of deduction reporting. And we really need for folks on the school side to have a good understanding of exactly what they're doing and how it affects their employees. So service is credited on the release of your deduction reports. So if your ESR, let's say it's me and I'm calling you up and I'm like, hey, I need those missing people in July fixed. I can't go forward until they're fixed, right? That means if it's been a year, let's say it's last July, right? None of your members can see any of their credible service in last year. And I guarantee you, one of them is anxiety ridden, is checking their credible service every day, and they're calling Scott's team to say, why is it still not there? Please get on top of it. And please, what we're asking is that you work with us to try and get this resolved, because it's really not good for any of us, right? And this is exactly why you might be hearing from some of your employees to say that their service is, quote, missing. My contributions are missing. Contributions are not missing. They're always in the employer account so they can get released into members' accounts. But members can't see them until the process is fully processed, or the reports are fully processed, pardon me. And so the service releases into their account. That's why we call them released reports. Now, on our side, I can tell you we've increased staff, moved some things around. I got moved to IT to try and help, have an influence on the system working better. We're trying to do everything we can to, try and get this under wraps and really get things moving as quickly as we can. What we really need is we need to make sure that whenever you're submitting a report, you make sure your payments match. You got to make sure that you're doing all the different steps, including monitoring your roster, right? I start out with this program telling you, by the way, it's a free benefit. All you have to do is maintain your information and we pay the bill. So it's not unreasonable to ask that you're giving us the information we need so that we can pay your bill. Okay. And that, all I can really say here is help us help you. If we're reaching out, we're trying to get something resolved, please make some time. Now, we understand if I reach out on a Wednesday and you're running payroll, I totally get that. Just tell me you're running payroll and let's see if we can connect on Friday. Okay. We need reasonableness. We don't need everyone to drop everything they're doing on that day. But there have been some cases where some folks are taking weeks to get back to us, and we really need to get this thing moving so that people will stop getting complaints. Now, creditable service. So if somebody is in the member self services portal, so we have an example member. His name's Algebra, and Al is going into the member self services portal, and he clicks on retirement account. So this is an actual screenshot from our member self services portal, obviously a fake person. And this is exactly what one of your employees will see if they click into to see their creditable service. And there's a couple of different account statements they can pop out. The most common one is going to be their cred service report. So I'm going to show you, it's a 4-page report. We're going to quickly look at all 4 pages. Okay. So the first page, you can see that their credited service is 16.32 years. Now, Al's probably like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I've been a member since 2001. Why do I only have 16 years of service? So that's because some of the service before 2010 hasn't been fully credited. And if you were looking through the information we have available here, I'm going to show you a section on page 2 that nobody ever reads. But sometimes you will have a member, particularly those with a lot of service, and they can't see their pre-2010 service. Once we certify their pre-2010 service, it will always show to them. So if you have someone considering a benefit, if you have somebody who's thinking of retiring, have them do a credit service estimate through our benefits team, and then that will make sure we make a priority of them. Once their prior to 2010 service is certified, it will show to them. Now we do have, if you look under the total creditable service, we have a nice thick paragraph before July 2010 at the top of this page too. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't read it. However, if they did, you can see in this particular example, this person worked in Berkshire Hills, Carver, and Milton, and none of their service in those communities are available. It has nothing to do with those employers. It's because all of that service was before 2010 when we implemented MyHRS. Once we certify Algebra's service in any of those employers, it will always be viewable to Al. So we converted over 50 million records or something like that as far as individual payroll records when we went to MyHRS. And so we do have people working on it. However, they prioritize folks going for a benefit. Now you can see the cred service breakdown though from 2010 on shows up one row for each year of service. And you can see Al's service when he's working at Hull and Milton looks really uniform and really clean. Okay. Now, one thing you will notice though, as Al continues to go on here, 2022, 2023, you might not show all of his service. If for some reason, say in this case, it's Brookline, but let's say Brookline was a couple reports behind or something along those lines, then Al might not see all of that service. And this is where you're going to get complaints from some of your employees. If you have an employee who's been, let's say they joined the MTRS 6 months ago and you're 7 months behind on your deduction reports, they're going to say, hey, I can't see anything. Wait, I think someone stole my money, right? And you can understand how people might, if they're coming from the outside, they don't fully understand how the whole process works. They get very upset very quickly. Now, we do have some things we've been telling members. I'm going to show you what those look like. But really, the best remedy for all of us is to get caught up. And we're doing the best we can to try and do that on our side. And we're looking for some help on doing that so that when your members are pulling these up, they can see all their service and they're happy. So, and then last but not least, the 4th page just kind of has disclosures, explains some other things. But again, I just didn't want to show 3 out of 4 pages. Now, one of the things that we've been doing, these are actual slides. I colored them up a little bit here, but these are actual slides from a member benefits program. And what we're explaining to them here, this is some of the stuff we say to members. I'm saying this because on multiple occasions, I've had employers call me up and they're, my employee thinks their money's missing. They talk to you, they're furious, yada, yada. But I can tell you when we're out doing benefits programs, we're explaining this to them. We're saying to them that there are some delays, okay? But the delay is not going to affect their retirement. We have processes to get around that. So if you have a district that's 6 months behind, we have a way that we can collect some extra information from you. We're not going to hold the member liable for the fact that their deductions are behind, okay? We use the data based on, the actual cred service that we use to calculate someone's benefit has been verified by a human being. And so if they ever have a year where like calendar creep kicks in and they have a cred service that looks like it's 0.98 years of service because one of their pay dates fell into the next year accidentally just because of timing, all that stuff's going to be, worked out in the wash, if you will. Okay. Just so that they have an idea. And we'll say to them, look, if this could be a thing you're seeing, if you sign in, please be mindful of what your last day shows as. I apologize. It looks like I might have fallen out of the slideshow? I can't tell if folks can still hear me. Scott, are you there?
I'm here. It looks okay
Okay.
on my end.
Okay, sorry. Teams did a really weird thing there. I apologize to everybody. All right, cool. So the other thing we've been telling members, if they need an account summary for a financial institution or some kind of court proceeding, we will prioritize them. If they're planning on retiring, they should fill in a credit service request. We will prioritize them. If they're looking to take a refund, we will also prioritize them. So as we're working with all employers to get caught up on this stuff, we are telling members we're going to do everything we can not to delay their benefit at all as part of the situation. But again, the best remedy for all of us is to work together to get this resolved. We need to get on top of these reports and get them processed through my TRS, and then hopefully we just won't have that issue. One of the most common things that holds up a deduction report is roster management, missing members, members that are showing up as terminated too early, people who don't have deductions taken properly, stuff like that. So please make sure that sometimes it's payroll and HR working together, whatever the situation is. Please make sure you're maintaining your roster. It's a big part of deduction reporting. It's going to be a big part of all of our success in turning this thing around. And then last but not least, of course, you're a big part of what we do, right? I mean, we provide a benefit to you and for your employees, but we need you to be the employer and tell us who's there, who's eligible. You're taking deductions, you're making determinations on reg comp. So you're a big part of what we do every single day. And then last but not least, if you have questions, if you find yourself in the situation, the young lady in the bottom left-hand corner there, please reach out. Every employer has an assigned employer services representative. If you don't know who your employer services representative is, you can always email the main email address, empsup. It's short for employer support. We don't even make you type out the whole thing. empsup@trb.state.ma.us. You'll get the employer services unit, and we'll connect you with a rep. So for some reason, if you're new or somehow you just don't know who your assigned representative is, you can always get us there. If it's an issue about retiree insurance, you'll see that we'll connect you to the insurance updates box, which is primarily Mildred Rodriguez. So with that, I don't know if we have any other questions.
We do have one question in the chat. Big thanks to Jamie, who's here, answering questions live in the chat. Here's one. We have some creditable service calculation errors that appear to be from a 27 pay period payroll calendar that was set up incorrectly for the year in error. Can we fix the years? Can we fix that year's calendar now to correct the CS calc? Would there be any negative downstream impacts? Is there a test environment that could be used to make sure it corrects the creditable service before changing it in the system?
Yeah, so in that situation, you definitely want to reach out to your employer services representative, or frankly, even me, and we'll make sure we take a look at it and see what it is. If it's a situation where the calendar itself is triggering a bad cred service, doesn't seem likely. However, within that 27 pay calc, if for some reason bad service correction codes were used or an incorrect service correction code, we might need to do some service adjustments to members. Or it occasionally is just that calendar creep thing I mentioned. So even though it looks wrong on the estimator online, we can see it. So sometimes it's just that the pay date sneaks over into what looks like the next school year, but it's clear to us, no, that's really the last pay from the previous school year. It isn't actually a problem. It just looks like it is on the credible service estimator. But what I'd say is I don't want to get overly specific in a public chat. Reach out to us and we'll look at that with you. And we have 5 test environments. So we can certainly look at it with you and see if we can figure out an issue or a solution.
Great. We got a couple more. The next one is, what if our district is not delayed in submitting the reports, but my TRS is delayed in processing them? If an employee reaches out to the MTRS to review service, do they see all the reports? Do they see that all the reports are there to be able to assist the employee?
So MTRS staff can see them all. But in theory, if you have reports that are impending, we're waiting for an answer. So if you think your reports are fully up to date and we haven't released them, there's been a miscommunication. Because if they were all 100% intact and ready to go, they'd be released. So it could be that they're 99% there and ready to go, and we're waiting on a roster question, or maybe the importance of a question we asked might not have translated well, and we need to get that resolved. But in theory, if those reports are ready to release, they've been released.
Great. The next question is, are there links to the PDFs for previous webcasts you've done this summer? I was on the MTRS intro, but didn't get a link for that deck. Yes, we do have all of these sessions recorded. The videos are usually posted the next day, and the slides are also posted there as well. I'll get the link and put it into the chat.
Yeah, and our goal is to try and get you out the handout beforehand. It's something we didn't think of for the first couple of programs, and there was some late changes to the deck yesterday, which is why we couldn't get them out with a reminder. But our goal is to try to start getting them out with the reminder before the presentation, so you have enough time to print them.
All right, looks like one last question.
Sure.
We are asked to do our reporting ASAP, which our district processes a month's deduction report before moving to the next month. What is MTRS's expected turnaround time to release a report?
It's a good question. So it sort of depends on volume. So we have 400 plus employers, and we either get no reports from people, or 420 people are all like, oh, I sent you last month's report. So we try to turn them around as quickly as we possibly can. But keep in mind too, we have to do them chronologically. So if you're turning around a report and you're like, oh, I've submitted the last 4 months, but the report that's 5 months old is one that has open questions, we can't do anything with the new reports because they have to be released chronologically. So, but I can tell you people are monitoring it literally every day. We're going through every employer. We're following up with folks that are on the staff to make sure that they're following up with employers. And it's something we review literally every week because we're trying to turn out every report we can as quickly as we possibly can.
Great, thank you so much. I just put into the chat a link to the page that has all of the recorded videos from previous sessions, and also a link to download the slides. And I'm to check with Jamie. Do we have any more questions?
Oh, no.
Nope. Okay, great. That's all the questions that we have in the chat for now, Bobby. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great Wednesday. And if you have questions, let us know. And again, we're not looking for everybody to drop everything you're doing. Just give us a good, reasonable responses, and we want to work with you. We don't want to work against you. So, if there's a different day we could talk to you, if we reach out or whatever, share that. We'll set up meetings with you if needed, if that makes more sense. And just, we still have 2 more training sessions that are going to be on deduction reporting. One's going to be on the importing and the structure, and the other one's going to be on getting your report from pending or initial to pending. So I'm looking forward to doing those with you. Oh, excuse me. We have a third one. On Friday, we're doing regular compensation, what earnings are eligible. So I look forward to doing that Friday with you guys, and then we'll work into the 2 deduction report ones the 2 weeks after. And, hopefully folks are finding this helpful.